Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to the Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. Tēnā koutou katoa and kia ora e tiwi, and welcome into the Kaka's Hoon. Remembering that Hoon is the plural or collective noun for the kaka, as in the bird. So we welcome you all into the Hoon today. Peter, how are you?
Bernard, I'm all right, thank you. I've been talking to you briefly today, thinking a lot about you today, and yeah, I'm keen to get on with it. I found today sort of weird to kind of plan and think about just the whole Trump thing with Xi, the weird conversation about Luxon with his haircut. Everything all just seemed incredibly serious, but also madly trivial. All at once.
Yeah, that's our timeline these days, isn't it? It is quite a thing. Trying to stay connected but not be overwhelmed is one of the central challenges of life these days. And I had a bit of a think about it, and obviously had a chat about it in the State of the Nation for 2025 posts that I put out.
You mean the State of the Kaka?
State of Kaka's Nation.
You are responsible for the State of the Nation. Yeah. So let me. I thought I was going to introduce you in our normal, incredibly highly professional way, but we talk about you going swimming, which you included in your routine for everybody, but which is also brilliant. And I was going to say that what a courageous thing that you had done, and I know you've done it every year more or less, which is sort of not just a thank you, but an explanation and a sense of duty to your subscribers. And I was just discussing with Simon, I think I probably read, I think there were 352 comments on it. You've done a statement on the Kaka about how you think you're doing, how you think you did last year, sharing the circumstances, the finances of it to some extent, or the direction of travel. And of course, I absorbed a lot about it. There's a few things there about the Hoon and your friends and partners on the Hoon. But I thought it was courageous to do, Bernard, and just to talk to people about your view on it, because I want to give you some feedback and them too.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we do reasonably regularly to just give people a sense of, how we're doing and how they're doing. Because one of the reasons people subscribe is to make sure that we keep doing what we're doing. And if it looks remotely like the situation has changed, everyone deserves a chance to understand what's going on. So it's clear to me that the number of subscribers, both free and paying subscribers, peaked in the middle of 2025 and have been falling basically since August. Paying subscribers are down about 5% in those 2 months. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but of course, anyone who understands the power of compounding,
particularly horrific in that chart that you put up. Yeah.
The power of compounding interest, it works for subscriptions as well. And so it's worth saying, hey, are we doing it the right way? Should we do it differently? How should we organize? How do we prioritize? Because, half of my battle is making sure that I'm using my time in the best way for paying subscribers. And so we talked about that, and I got some amazing feedback.
You did.
Apart from anything else, people love the Hoon. That was one of the themes that came through. Obviously, we're very keen to keep that going. And also people wanted to see perhaps a bit more of my analysis and commentary and a bit less of me pulling together lists of links to other news articles.
Yeah, they're coming to you. I mean, I think, Bernard, it is a tremendous, we always say this, and I've been doing this I was thinking about this, your note provoked me to think about how long you've been doing this, how long we've been doing this together on the Hoon, which is really only an adjunct to the Kaka, although, maybe one of the lessons is that we need to flick it out into the globe, as Vincent Heering has said. But also, you and I have worked together for about 25 years in various forms from time to time. And I think the way you've opened yourself up to your subscribers and the generosity that you do it with is amazing, because it's your knowledge about the economy, your perspective on the society in New Zealand, and your quiet charm and lack of cynicism that allows you to address this audience and have such a kind and thoughtful engagement with them.
Thank you. Yeah, I try. It's not always easy, and I sometimes do, sink into a bit of a frustrating loop where you think, gee, things will
I
get
have
better.
no idea what you're talking about.
A frustrating loop where I wonder whether things will ever get better. But I must say, the other thing that sort of emerged for me from the 350
Yeah, what did you
comments
learn
is that
so far?
A, less is more. B, perhaps a bit more of me and a bit less links. C, there's
Fewer
an opportunity. Yeah.
links. Yeah.
And better punctuation and
Yeah.
grammar. But finally, it's there's an opportunity for me to do to focus more on solutions and on what you'd call constructive journalism, coming up with new ideas, testing new ideas, and explanatory journalism, explaining
One
to
thing we
people
have,
behind the
just
scenes.
let me interrupt you on that, because we talked about this maybe a year ago, and then possibly even 2 years ago, about solutions journalism, because we had, I think from memory, we had one of my guests come on to talk about the concept of solutions journalism, and it had a big impact with our readers at that time. But I think you do that very well generally, but maybe a reinforcement of it is a good thing. But it's also hard work, doing solutions, going against the tide and saying, here's how we can actually solve this problem, not just reporting the problem. It's quite difficult. And let me just also, in the spirit of responding to the feedback, this isn't, us being personal and talking about where we buy our clothes or whether I bought you a new shirt this week, Bernard. It's about giving feedback, because I think, very few people would disclose themselves the way you did this week.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good opportunity to sort of rest and look back and look forward in a way that gets me out of the daily news flow. One of my weaknesses and strengths is that I love the news. I see myself as a news guy, and so it's very hard, actually, particularly when there's lots of news coming at you, when as Steve Bannon said, you want to flood the zone with news, or whatever he calls it.
Shit is what he called it.
Yeah. So if you're a news guy, you feel a responsibility to cover what's actually just happened today. But there's so much happening, and there's just one of me, and that's the other thing is I'm difficult to scale, and until we can invent a Bernard AI, which would be the worst thing ever.
Actually, I quite like a Bernard AI. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm sure I'd chew up a lot of energy and water.
Well, Bernard, let me just say a couple of things. So I think we should absorb this further, because I know I provoked you today by saying we should discuss this. But one of the things that I wanted to address, because I'm getting kind of exhausted by this elsewhere in my New Zealand universe, and it's the idea that came across from some people that you were somehow a leftist and even a Marxist. And I've seen this term bandied about to the point where I don't think I've got it quite within reach, but I bought something like the Penguin Guide to Marxism when I was back in the UK, because I thought, Jesus Christ, I see this term bandied about all the time, and I really need to think about what it actually means. And I'm pretty sure, Bernard, that you're not a Marxist, despite having gone to Massey University, that hotbed of Marxism. But then I thought, and I think this quite strongly about myself, but I don't have the same vehicle that you do. To me, you are a progressive, or that this is that the Kaka, and to some extent, if I have some influence over it, the Hoon is an inherently progressive dialogue, lowercase p. It isn't leftist, but it certainly isn't conservative, lowercase c, because it's about thinking that we can be the better angels of ourselves. Things can be better, and we can be positive. I just don't want you to slip into the idea that it's better marketing to be a cynical old prick like some of the other people that we see doing very well in the podcast world.
Yeah, you're right. That phrase is it's
You
like
mean cynical old prick? or progressive?
Marxist is a phrase that it's like a shorthand in the keyboard warrior versus keyboard warrior, you know, civil wars that you see online. It doesn't actually mean anything. It really is just like, you know, throwing a grenade over the top and
Yeah.
waiting for the thing to go bang. And increasingly, it's meaningless.
It's a damp squib, which
Yes.
which I found I was thinking about the other day, which, as you know, is another naval term for the gunpowder charge that used to stick down cannons. But just embrace the progressive. If I were you, and be positive. You are positive, and you're also positive about New Zealand. But maybe we should be more positive about New Zealand. But the fact that you haven't, as somebody pointed out, you haven't said a nice thing about the coalition is not necessarily because you're a Marxist, Trotskyite, Leninist. It's because they've talked the country down since they came in.
Yeah, and if you had a chat to some of the previous Labor government, they would say rude things about me too, because I was quite constructive and critical about them too. But actually, no, I think I've said some nice things about the current government in some areas. I think Chris Bishop is doing some really interesting things, and some of his speeches have been the best I've heard from a politician in New Zealand in recent years. And you can't ignore the energy and the ambition, certainly from people like Chris Bishop. I wish that sometimes he'd focus on other areas and use other tools that he has at his disposal. But I'm certainly not necessarily in one camp or the other, and certainly trying to, you know, progress things. You're right, and being constructive is always a good reminder to scare away the dark clouds and the other angels.
Happy, Bernard.
Yeah. The other angels that crawl onto your shoulder.
Yeah. I mean, I think also the thing I've been thinking about a lot lately, looking at media, and Catherine's coming in to tell us how gloomy things are, except that she's our angel of climate death. I mean, we have criticisms of the media here. People had criticisms of you, and certainly of me, and your 350,000 bits of feedback.
They love you too, Peter.
Not so. But imagine how bad it would be without even the slightly inadequate aspects of New Zealand media at the moment. You would have politicians having even more control of the discourse than they already do, and a huge volume of very dark and untrustworthy material. I think we should talk. In fact, it just occurred to me, I might get my old boss Jimmy Wales to come on to talk about his new book about trust. But
and his competition, Grokpedia. Did you see that this week?
As vulnerable as it is to some extent, imagine not having the media there to actually be a filter on some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway,
can you imagine what AI would come back with if there was no Wikipedia, at least?
Well, funny you should say that, because I did do some AI searches today about dialogue and news to try and test some of my assumptions that I've pitched to you today. But anyway,
yeah, it's a difficult time to be
joining us by the looks of it from downtown Jamaica.
Is it quite windy outside today in Wellington, Catherine?
It's a glorious day outside today in Wellington.
It's that perfect day that happens at least once every 6 years. It's great to see you. Thank you very much for coming on, and we're really lucky that we can do this section on climate. It's one of the things I'm keen to cling on to, because it is so important. We saw it in the last week, of course, with these horrible storms, unprecedented, shocking, surprising storms in the South Island. Pictures of irrigation pivots, tossed around like matchsticks, trees, entire shelter belts bent over, 8,000 properties without power, hundreds of dairy farms without power. It is quite the thing, because it's here. Climate change has changed. It's already causing extreme weather. I had a bit of a rant last week about why we weren't seeing the words climate in the stories about weather. But Catherine, we've got a very tangible new tool that's come out today, which will help everyone to understand better what climate change means for us. Could you talk a bit about it?
Yeah, so there's a new tool that's come out from NIWA that looks at flood maps at a national level. So it's looking across Aotearoa and comparing different regions and looking at what happens at +1, +2, and +3 degrees of warming compared to where we're at today. And it is, yeah, it's really very useful, I think, because a lot of the mapping work that's been done to date has been done at regional levels and at council levels, and there's that they're not necessarily easy to compare between regions, and some of the regions that really need it the most don't have the resources to do a lot of that work either. So this tool is very useful, but it's also telling us some things that are a little bit worrying, and even in terms of our risks for people being exposed to a 1 in 100 year flooding event. There's 750,000 people in New Zealand that are at risk of flooding.
Already, yeah.
Already, yeah. And so that's before any more changes happen. And quite a bit of property as well. So something like $235 billion worth of private property, but there is also infrastructure. Something like 20% of roads are at risk around the country. So yeah, there's a lot to take in. It doesn't go down to the resolution of these maps. It doesn't go down to neighbourhood level. Like that's the sort of thing that we would still need local councils.
Are you sure? Because I just looked at mine today and it said coastal erosion risk, and I just thought I could see all the real estate agents reducing £100,000 off my house.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at it from a, like you can look down to kind of, I guess, like a suburban level, but it doesn't give you specifics at street level. So there are still higher resolution mapping that can be done at more locally. But it does, it should give you some pretty good ideas about whether you are in a zone that's at risk or not.
Yeah, could you talk, Catherine, about how important it is that people have these tools, direct, often updated, nationally consistent tools like this, to start to get their heads around it? Because, until now, if you were of the climate skeptic mood, you could say, well, we're not sure about this. This was just an extreme piece of weather that happened all the time. They had storms in the 1700s. You can't say that. Where's your proof? Where's your evidence? Well, now we have some very, peer-reviewed, 5 years of heavy work, combination of data, bulletproofed, and continually updated, because the true flood maps are still to come. And but this gets us going, doesn't it, in sort of understanding how this affects us all.
Yeah, I think, it's probably quite meaningful for people to start to get a sense of how it might affect them individually, or how it might affect their community. And there's a few kind of things that are worth paying, attention to. One is, how bad things are in some parts of the country. Like it's very different from one region to another, but the amount of change that you're going to get across those degrees of increase is very different from one region to another as well. And so if you look at Auckland, for instance, it has one of the lower levels of exposure to flood risk, and it doesn't change that much from 1 to 2 to 3 degrees, although we have some good experience of what that can look like from the anniversary day flood. So if that's at the lower end of exposure, you can imagine what that means for some of the regions like Hawke's Bay, Gisborne, Tasman, and Whanganui, Manawatu, for instance, that are at the higher end. West Coast, Nelson, Canterbury, very, very high existing risk. But those other three, Hawke's Bay, Tasman, and Whanganui, are the ones that their risk accelerates massively, over the next.
I guess, Catherine, that's just seeing people talk about this on the feed. I sent you something about Bill Gates saying today that we need to shift to climate anticipation and dealing with it rather than worrying about it and trying to offset it. Is this? I mean, the propensity for this to happen is, we know, getting greater, and the propensity for the storms to be, that is what the scientific forecast is. But how do people actually prepare for it, and how do you oh, sorry, that's a huge question. What do you think this means for a sense of preparedness and government action in this? Is NIWA just doing its job? And what are we hearing from the government, do you think? Sorry, that's several gigantic questions there, at least three of which were too large.
I mean, first of all, I would say I think it's really important that people start to get more prepared at a community level and to understand what their risks are in their local areas and what they can do about it locally. And one of the reasons I think that is particularly important is because not all of the support at a national leadership level that ought to be there is really there at the moment, I don't think. And so people need to understand their own risks. Part of the thing that we also need to be aware of that is going to become increasingly tricky, I think, is some of the areas that are most exposed or have the highest existing risk are also areas where the average income is lower and where there is a smaller rates tax base to be able to do, for instance, a lot of the more detailed mapping. And so there is a real risk in terms of the way that we decide to move forward, that we instead of taking care of all of us, some people are enabled to move out of the way and push less able people into the way of things. You know what I mean? Like there are ways and ways of choosing to deal with this, and we need to start having more conversations both at community level and at national level about what kind of society we are that we want to be and how we want to move forward with this sort of thing. So I think those sort of conversations, it's really important that we start thinking about them now, and thinking about what sort of, how we want things to look in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years when some of these temperature increases come about.
Because as we saw with the government's response to the climate adaptation issue a couple of weeks ago, they have basically washed their hands and said, we are not going to use the government's money, taxpayers' money to bail people out. You're on your own, people, which is...
Do you think that landed, Bernard? Because I don't think it did.
No, because no one wants
I mean, I know you drew it, you drew, but that is a gigantic shift from the Earthquake and War Damages Commission, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. And it is, it's relevant because, all up and down the country, just a few weeks ago, we had a bunch of elections where many of the voters agreed with that and said, well, I don't want my taxpayers' money used to, do big things. I'd rather just not pay the rates, thank you very much. And a good example of that is in Westport, where the mayor of Westport, or Buller, lost his job because over the last few years he's been supportive of a plan to move a big bunch of the town upstream, if you like, away from the floods. And that was one of the reasons he lost. In fact, he talked about this at a big climate conference in Christchurch a few weeks ago and was in tears, talking about the fact that his own people were essentially ignoring these forecasts, and they weren't getting any help from the centre, and were essentially choosing to cover their eyes rather than deal with it.
Which is another reason not to dismiss Bernard Hickey as a Marxist or Catherine Dyer as a doom queen. This is, the answers are there for us to try. And I thought that comment that you made, Catherine, there about local communities thinking about what it means for them is actually a really positive thing, even if Bernard's given us then an example in Westport that it's not going to work out necessarily. But look, local communities thinking about what the implications are. Just finish on that, please.
I think there's a lot of really good signs that local communities and other groups, like through climate assemblies, for instance, that people are much better at making decisions than we think they are when it comes to thinking about the long term or thinking about what they need to do when they have the right information and they have the right space and the right spaces to be able to talk with each other about the stuff and to get expert information. They are very good at making the right decisions, and in fact better, I think, than our national political leaders are. And so I think we need to be getting more resources and more decision-making tools to the places that need them, and where they can make really good decisions. And I think that that the ability for people to do that will also turn into more aware people of their own circumstances and what they need to do, putting more pressure on governments to do better things at a national and even at an international level. So if there is any hope, any pressure that's going to, any leverage that's going to happen or that's going to be meaningful in the future, I think that's the level that it will come from. So I really support the idea of putting more tools and funding at local levels.
Particularly those local climate assemblies.
Which also reinforces the idea of decent information.
Yeah.
Unbiased information. Speaking of
But
which,
it has to be, supported by giving people the means to actually make decisions for themselves that are meaningful for their own situations. Not just shoving information out there and leaving it to people individually to make what they will of it.
Yeah, or buy tickets home. Thank you so much,
Catherine. Thank you. Brilliant.
Robert, speaking of unbiased, straight information, we started the show with a little homage to Bernard's charm, intelligence, accessibility, and his progressive instincts, lowercase progressive instincts, to tell stories in a positive way. I felt a bit desperate when I sent you a message today to set up this session, that I just couldn't see anything very positive other than this weird puppet show going on in Korea today with Xi and Trump. What are you focusing on for that?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, Bernard. Good afternoon,
Thank
Peter.
you.
It's great to be with you. Obviously, all the build up to the meeting between Xi and Trump, both sides, they'd had a preliminary meeting between both sets of advisors in Kuala Lumpur, and apparently that went well. So they've got an agreed framework for the discussion, and it's going to tackle questions like tariffs and rare earth materials. And I think most people are hoping that the United States and China can find some sort of understanding and get some sort of stability into the relationship, because it has been very much up and down since Mr. Trump returned. And to be fair, it was a bit up and down under Biden, but not quite. The pendulum didn't swing quite so wildly. The thing to note here, I think, is that China has quietly stood its ground for much of the second Trump administration. And I think, as we've discussed this before, but I think I found it very telling about a month ago when Scott Bessent said, the Treasury Secretary, said there's not going to be any decoupling of our economies. And he said it in such an emphatic way, as if to say it's a fantasy to believe otherwise.
That followed, Robert, though, that meeting in Geneva, where we've had these weird meetings between people like Scott Bessent and the Chinese leadership, other than Xi, of course, about these conditions. So do you think there's actual diplomacy going on behind this that then requires just the imprimatur of these two Madame Tussauds exhibits?
It would seem that's been the case. Or if we are to believe the reports, there was intensive work in preparation for this meeting in this APEC summit. And I think that the people around Trump, and indeed the people around Xi Jinping, know that you can't simply expect a meeting with Mr. Trump without any careful preparation. Because at the best of times he moves off the script. But if he hasn't got a script at all, the outcome could even be even more chaotic. So I think that, and also the stakes are very high for the United States. One thing I found encouraging throughout Mr. Trump's second term is that he has repeatedly said he does want a positive relationship with China, and which I found slightly difficult to square with many people in his administration saying that China was the real enemy and we had to separate Russia from China, and then we can concentrate on tackling China. So it's almost as if the Trump people have been on a bit of a learning curve, and after 9 or 10 months in office, they've recognised that China's here to stay and they're not easily contained, and that actually that Mr. Obama was right back in 2009 when he said within a few months of being in office, China's too big to contain, and we should have no illusions about that. Words to that effect. So it's it's almost like we've gone full circle in a way.
Yeah, it is. But what are you teaching at the moment in that regard about how to think about that? It must be so hard to think about how you frame the cycle that you just described of going within. I mean, from the Clinton period of where economic activity and inclusion of China will lead to democracy in China or some form of it, hasn't happened. And
yeah,
now
I
we've
mean,
got-
the difficulty is that the first Trump administration, I think Mr. Trump convinced himself he was betrayed by dangerously independent advisors. He's now got his own team, handpicked, whose major qualification is loyalty, and yet he's having to reach similar conclusions that other presidents have reached. So I think Mr. Trump genuinely believed that through tariffs, America could redesign the global economy to almost exactly tailored to meet America's interests. America first and re-engineering the global economy using tariffs. China didn't play that game. And I think he's really encountered the realities of China's weight in the world. China's been it is in an economic transition at the moment. It's moving from a manufacturing export-driven
to a
economy to
consumptive.
one which is high-tech orientated. But make no mistake about the Chinese ambition. They are seeking a leadership position in green technologies and also in AI and solar energy as well. So in the green area. So, I think all this is registered, and I think Scott Bessent has quietly worked behind the scene
Do you think
to
he may be
convince
the
Mr.
sensible-
Trump it's not in our interest to pretend that we can dominate China in perhaps the way that appealed on the campaign trail.
Yeah, well,
I think-
let's see the readout when it finally comes. Cause
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it may be, in my case, it may be a case of wishful thinking, hoping that it'll be a positive outcome. We'll just have to see. But all the indications before the meeting were, I think, quite positive.
Yeah, and so what should New Zealand's response to that, or New Zealand's position be in this? You will have been amused, as I'm sure everybody was, for about 9 seconds with the discussion about hair and golf and, Christopher Luxon.
It's so
sprinting off the
disappointing when a
stage.
prime minister gives little details other than that he's given the president of the United States an invite, if he's in this part of the world visiting Australia, New Zealand, swing by for a round of golf. I mean, this is an administration which has challenged New Zealand's interests in multiple ways. First of all, the obvious one, 15% tariffs, but no less important. Mr. Trump has been upending a worldview that all New Zealand governments have had since the Second World War, that international relations should be based on rules and principles. And Mr. Trump has threatened close friends of New Zealand, not least Canada, with territorial invasion, but also Denmark as well through Greenland. So make no mistake about it, Mr. Trump's view of the world doesn't coincide with ours. I'm a little bit disconcerted by the current approach to the Trump administration. I know we discussed this before. It's interesting that I think as time progresses, countries will have a chance to reflect on whether their softly approach, sometimes known as daddy diplomacy, which is a sort of orchestrated
Thank you
praise
from
of Trump,
Matt
even if he
Mark Rutte.
sneezes.
Yeah.
That what a great guy he is. I think there is some some signs of reflection that maybe it's better to have a two-track approach where you respond positively where your interests converge, but you do not hesitate to dig in when Mr. Trump is seriously assaulting your national interests.
And actually, when you look at how China has dealt with Trump, very much quietly, but very deliberately saying no when the tariffs idea came up, and using their power on rare earths to actually really push back at the United States and their non-buying for a year of soybeans to really hurt Trump where it hurts the most in the farming area. Yeah, Iowa. It's China has not taken a backward step at all, and Trump sort of respects that. And now he's come.
He does, and it's the same with Canada. Mark Carney. I mean, Trump keeps having sort of tantrums about Carney, and then breaks off and imposes short-term tariffs. But for all the bluster, I don't think, Carney's been more seriously disadvantaged than anyone else.
No.
We played the game. We got 15% tariffs.
Exactly.
We kept our head down and didn't say anything about.
We aren't the largest trading partner of the United States.
No, of course we're not.
I do like the idea that we could suddenly grow a pair, as it were.
Well, I think it's not a question of growing a pair. I think it's a question of defending our national interests. I mean, New Zealand critically depends on a rules-based international order. It also critically depends on the system of free trade. And Mr. Trump is declared war on both. So we can remain quiet and accept it, but we're accepting the erosion of our interests in the process. So it seems to me much smarter, rather than desperately seeking a sit-down with Mr. Trump at APEC or in the... it seems to me that it would be smarter, and I know the Prime Minister's doing this because he's just signed an agreement with the ASEAN, a comprehensive...
Yeah, well, he signed it, and then
yes,
Winston
he signed
Peters
it
in the middle of the night said, "We," and then fired and then spiked.
That showed an
What
incredible
was going on there?
sensitivity, didn't it, or insecurity? I'm not quite sure which word you like to choose there. I think prime ministers are entitled to say "I." By the way,
Yeah,
because everybody knows that a prime minister speaks that way.
Everybody except their foreign minister and the former deputy prime minister. Is that right?
Well, he may think, I better not go down that road.
It was quite a revealing two.
Yes, I think so, particularly the way it was hastily removed.
Yeah. Robert, thank you so much for coming on
Thank
the
you.
show. Lovely to have you on again. And we shall find out a bit more about how President Trump and Xi talked later in the...
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's time now to welcome in James Stewart, who is the CEO of Home Capital Partners.
James.
James, lovely to have you on the Hoon. Good to see you.
Great to see you guys. Hope you're well.
Thank you. A few weeks ago, we had Israel Cooper on, who is the co-founder of the wider Home Group, which is doing some really interesting things at scale, building an awful lot of affordable and social housing. So we're not talking tens or dozens, we're talking hundreds or thousands in the long run. Could you talk a bit more about how Home Capital Partners is raising the funds to work with Israel and the wider Home Group to build these homes?
Absolutely. So we're the guardian of the Home Foundation capital. So they've entrusted us with their capital to invest on their behalf. And the neat thing with what they're doing is it's not just about making a return. It's clearly about enabling whānau into warm, dry, safe, healthy homes. But it's also about enabling others to come and follow by providing their capital as well, and recognising that this is new. This isn't an established investment class in New Zealand, but using their capital to de-risk and increase the returns of other investors to help them dip their toe in the water and to realise that you can make a good return on your money whilst also doing good along the way in the housing space.
Because this is a really interesting point, isn't it? How do we get capital into a part of the market where the private sector, just let everyone do their own thing, hasn't really found a solution? Rental property investors tend to build or pay for maybe one or two new homes here and there, if we're lucky, a dozen, and they tend to be townhouses. The need for hundreds and hundreds of more medium density 1, 2, 3, 4 bedroomed places that are really well connected to each other and to the rest of the communities just hasn't happened, and there's a clear market failure there. But when the government has decided, both this government and actually the last government to an extent, not to use the Crown's balance sheet or Crown equity to help what you call the non-government sector start to do this social housing. The question is, well, where are we going to get the capital, and who's going to funnel it into the right place, and how are we going to get all these houses built? And it's really interesting that in other countries, we have seen these vehicles, these pathways for private capital to get involved in this community house building, social house building. Can you talk a bit about how it's done overseas and how you're part of this process of trying to build it here?
Indeed, nice. I mean, there's some great examples overseas about how the Australian government, for example, has set up a fund to deliver 20,000 social houses and 20,000 affordable houses in the next decade. Using government grants and using government underwrites and capital that can sit there. And so they've done some great work, and I think that's provided some leadership to this, or some examples to this government, and what they're doing with the Community Housing Funding Agency on the debt side of the piece is fantastic. What they're doing with providing social housing contracts to community housing providers is great, because that de-risks the revenue side for entities that want to come in as well. But I guess part of our ethos is looking wider than that as well. And like you said, Bernard, there aren't many great examples of mixed tenure, medium density housing around the country, where you've got master plan communities that are designed to help people flourish. You're not just racking and stacking as many homes as you want. Excuse the cliche, but you're thinking about where the children will play and what the lifestyles are going to be like for the people that are living in there. And the neat thing about medium density housing as well is that it can enable some cross subsidy. So you might sell some to market, and instead of just banking the profits and buying a new car or boat, you can use those to subsidise people into shared equity or progressive home ownership. Your profits from your market rentals might be able to subsidise your affordable rentals. So all of a sudden you've got a diverse community with different people from different backgrounds living in different housing tenures, all in the same community, and they cross-subsidise each other, so you can make it stack up financially and get a really nice blended return.
Yeah,
James, let me just interrupt Bernard slightly on that, because I knew. So that sounds absolutely idyllic. How do you counter what has happened in, for example, London, where you will have these agglomerations of affordable housing, social housing, and higher end housing, and you get situations where, when you talked about kids playing together, you've got either separate playgrounds or playgrounds from which the poor kids are not allowed to go. But how do we moderate those slightly less pleasant kind of utopian views?
Yeah, I think Bernard hit the nail on the head when we're talking about the scale piece, is that it's really hard to do that with 6 or 10 homes, because you're putting in homes and there's not much scope for amenity around it. But we've got a couple of larger sites that we're in the process of master planning and designing and rolling out on a staged basis, where you can provide a controlling influence to actually think about how the communities are going to interact with these spaces and interact with their neighbours over the next 50 to 75 years. And you can design them really well so that people interact with each other and form relationships with each other. So you can take a leadership role, and you can place different amenities in different areas in order to not force, but enable people to play together and thrive in communities that flourish together.
Can you give us a sense of the scale, James, of what you're doing with a fund you've just launched, and the sort of numbers of houses and how fast we're moving here?
Indeed. So we've just launched our first fund, which is a social and affordable housing fund. It's a mixed tenure fund with social, affordable and market rentals peppered throughout it. There's 267 homes in there, and the value of the fund's around about $200 million. So we're raising $67 million in order to provide the equity portion of that, and that partners up with the amazing team at Community Finance with their Community Housing Funding Agency debt that sits on the other side. The Home Foundation is coming in as the cornerstone investor, so they're providing $47 million of that $67 million worth of capital. But the neat thing is that they really want to see this as an attractive investment to others that might be curious about impact investing and might be wanting to dip their toe in the water of using their capital for good as well as getting a return. And so what they've done for the first 5 years is taken $18 million of that 47 and put it into a special share class that doesn't get a dividend. And so the dividend pool for the first 5 years can be boosted up for those other investors. And we all know from, the first 5 years of paying a mortgage, it's pretty skinny and pretty tight, as your rent payments, your mortgage payments are quite high. But over time, your rents go up over time and your income comes in. So that enables that balanced return to happen over a longer period.
James, just before Bernard comes in again, you used a phrase just then that I think is worth exploring, and Bernard and I might explore it in an article in his podcast, in his Substack perhaps. Impact investing, and it's a concept that I have heard a lot, particularly in the US, where you do socially good investing, but you do it along corporate lines, or along traditional VC lines. Could you maybe just elaborate a tiny bit about impact investing?
Yeah, more than happy to. So, I mean, your traditional philanthropy world, most philanthropists, they'll have, let's say they've got $50 million in the bank and they've sold a company or they've done well in life and they've got 50 million. They'll put that into stocks and bonds and they'll get that making as much money as possible. And that might give them, let's say, $5 million a year in returns. Then they go and give away that $5 million to the stuff they care about, the Habitat for Humanity and the Philharmonic Orchestra and environmental causes. So you've got a money-making thing on one side and you've got a philanthropic thing on the other. What impact investment really does is it mashes those two things together, and it recognizes that there are investments that you can make that actually deliver on the social outcomes or the environmental outcomes you want to do. And so that might be in the environmental space, some agricultural tech and things reducing nitrates. And so you can invest in that instead of Fisher and Paykel shares, and you can do an environmental good as well as getting a financial return in the VC space. What we think this one does really nicely is it provides impact to the 267 families that are needing warm, dry, safe, affordable housing. And it provides our forecast is showing about a 12% return over the long term. So it provides a return to investors as well as...
Just tell us what that, because if anybody, I don't think I quite picked up that. Just tell us again what the actual investment would be, and maybe, Bernard usually asks the final questions, but just what is the opportunity for people who are listening to this to invest, and maybe just address how it differs from, say, Sam Stubbs and Simplicity, please.
Amazing. And what Sam and the Simplicity team is doing is incredible as well. And they're obviously you can invest your KiwiSaver in them and take an equity position largely. And then they've also got the debt position on the other side. So obviously debt's lower risk, equity, gets paid last and takes a higher risk position, so needs a higher return on it. So there's the option there for impact investors to, so at the moment we're open to wholesale investors with a retail offering launching early in the new year. So mum and pop investors can tip in $100, $1,000 as they've got it, and know that they're doing good with their money. They can drive past some of these amazing developments and go, hey, cool, we'll use some of our money to make that happen. But at the moment we're open to wholesale investors. So let's say they've got $50,000 or $100,000. They buy units in the fund. And that capital gets multiplied typically about 4 times with the debt component to it. So you tip in $100,000, you unlock $500,000 worth of housing. That enables the fund to buy completed developments. So there's no development risk at all. We've ring-fenced that off to the side to make this as simple and as low risk as possible. They can buy completed developments, and some of those are rented out by our team as affordable rentals or market rentals. And some of those developments we lease to the Salvation Army, to Court, to Habitat for Humanity, a few iwi community housing providers. And then they do the work with the families in their community, bring them in, make sure their needs are being met, and look after them from a social housing perspective. So there's a blended return across the portfolio.
Just finally from me, James.
Finally.
No, we'll get there. I am fascinated to get a sense of how much enthusiasm there is from what I'd call, the rich end of town in New Zealand. We keep forgetting, actually, that increasingly in the last decade or so, we've had some people make a lot of money. Now, some of them have, sold their software company for tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. They've then reinvested that. They are now worth hundreds of millions of dollars. We do have a billionaire in New Zealand. We've got a few New Zealand citizens who are billionaires. And you'd hope that they realise that in this increasingly unequal world where the money seems to run uphill and then coagulate at the top, if we're going to have any progress, we need to redirect some of that down and start doing good with it. How much in your meetings with philanthropically minded investors in New Zealand, how much appetite is there for this? Because philanthropists in New Zealand don't necessarily have a large profile or a culture of investing, and let's say the way that American philanthropists can.
Indeed, no, very different cultures between New Zealand and Aussie, and we don't sing from the rooftop about our generosity in New Zealand to the tune that the Americans do, which I think is horrendous. We should be proud that we're in a position to be able to give away, and we've got a heart that wants to do that. So, absolutely, we've had great feedback. Is the really simple answer, Bernard. We launched 2.5 weeks ago, and talking to those that are either impact investors or impact adjacent, and they're curious around it. This provides something that's stable. 3/4 of the revenues are underwritten by the government, and it provides them the opportunity to, a lot of these guys are thinking about legacy, and they're nearing retirement, and they're going, cool, I've sold a company, it's employed thousands of people, it's been great, but actually, what do I want to be known for with my wealth? And this enables them an option to really address their privilege and go, great, I've got a responsibility. What am I going to do with my wealth, and what am I going to be known for, and can I do some good?
Excellent. James Stewart there, the CEO of Home Capital Partners, which
Thanks
is
so much, James.
which is working with the Home Foundation to build lots of social and affordable and market houses in a way that we haven't seen before at this scale in New Zealand, I think, and it's a really positive development, helping to address some of these massive problems we have. James, thank you so much for being on the Hoon.
All the best. Lovely to talk.
Thanks a lot, James.
Go ahead.
So, Bernard, am I leading you into your soliloquy and possibly a bit more?
Yes, that would be great.
Would that be all right?
Yes,
Yeah, just we just do our we do our production on the fly. It's funny. I just also should address a couple of the questions that have come up on the YouTube commentary, which I know you don't look at, Bernard, which is another thing we should talk about as far as the feedback goes. Yes, we do know that Donald Trump is the antithesis of Chauncey Gardner, the Peter Sellers character. Thank you, David Morrig, which is probably one of my most favourite films. And if I can recommend, there is a newly revised version of the Peter Sellers biography that's just out. But yeah, we do know that some of the people just were saying that chap just now, James, was probably a slum landlord, which I'm not
that's
so sure
not true,
about.
and
Yeah,
we're not going to.
exactly.
That's going
Well,
out.
the risk of it. I know.
Yeah, yeah.
So we'll deal with we deal with the difficult issues, Bernard, but we do it in a positive way.
Yeah, and also I'm really keen
Cranked
to
up.
highlight the work and big work that's being done around improving the number of social and affordable homes.
Yeah.
If there's anything in my solutions journalism ambit that I'm really keen to look at, is how organisations like Simplicity, like the community housing providers, all sorts of people are trying to solve this problem. It's not just, well, we'll let the government do it, or the government should do it.
Government is not necessarily the solution to this, which is going to really piss off a couple of people who've just been commenting on, who think you are in fact a Marxist or a socialist. Now, Bernard, we were going to, I think your soliloquy initially was going to be about Labour and the hesitant, gentle reopening or opening of the idea of a capital gains tax in New Zealand by Labour.
Yes,
Tell us about your view on that.
Yeah, this is all about the capital gains tax policy that was released this week, a little bit earlier than Labour planned, because it appears to have been leaked or
Is that true, do you think?
stumbled out. We have no idea. And luckily, Labour has decided not to investigate it, because when you try to do that, you end up with Jamie Lee Ross style disasters. And
has Jamie Lee Ross joined the Labour Party?
No.
Jesus Christ, now that would be a very good story.
No, that's that story about...
Brothel owner joins Labour Party. What a good idea. That's a very good idea. I like that.
No, and so he's Chris Hipkins has said, if we happen to find out, they're in trouble, but there's actually, let's focus on the policy. And I agree with him. Come September next year, no one will remember the leak. They'll just be still
Leak was actually
debating.
a very good idea. It's got us all talking about it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bernard, about what you think about it.
So this is a incrementalist, keep your head down, hope that you can keep away from the machine guns and the artillery coming at you from across the other side and squeak over no man's land and get into government. I actually think this, what I call the third way, Clinton, Blair way of what you call the progressive left of trying to not just win elections, but make change, is now too little too late. I think we're at the point now where inequality and the crises we have in housing and climate and poverty are so great, and the level of disillusion and demand for real change is so great that there's a risk here that, firstly, if you get into power, like we've seen with Keir Starmer, having not promised much at all, and then suddenly have been confronted with these very real issues that haven't gone away, and everyone's gone, actually, you're not solving the problem. I'm going to vote for Nigel Farage. So, there's a real need for someone to address the problem. Otherwise, we're going to have someone who we don't like address the problem with massively disruptive reforms. May as well try some massively useful disruptive reforms rather than try and sneak in and hope to increment your way there, because we're way past the point of incrementalization. You only need to look at the external migration figures from Wellington, for example. In the last year, 1,700 people gave up on Wellington and left the country in the last year.
Left the country or left Wellington? That's a different thing.
The country.
Did they move to Wairarapa or did they move to Otaki?
Luckily, the Stats Centre looks at population movements. They can tell you internal migration and external away from the country, and it's 1,700 away from the country. There were 200 who came from the rest of New Zealand into Wellington, and there was natural population growth of about 700. So net.
So you're finding it much harder to let your property in Wellington, or will do?
We're finding it.
I can't remember whether you still have it. I can't. Yeah. Carry on.
Luckily we've got 2 daughters who live in Wellington, and we want to make sure that they are in a great place to enjoy living there. But it's tough. It's tough for so many young people there at the moment. And I think if you talk to those people, and occasionally I get a chance to, they're not looking at increments. They're not looking at, well, let's get in there and see if we can tweak it over the next 10 or 20 years. They want big change now. And sure, there are people on the other side who don't want big change now. But if you do a Keir Starmer and get in there and faff around, we're going to end up in a position where it may not be Winston Peters, but it may be someone else who proposes something truly awful and radical. You've got to think, the Conservatives in Reform, they want to deport millions of people from the UK.
Yeah, but not millions of British people who are trying to find student housing. Just Bernard, before you go completely out on that limb, just come back for a minute, if you don't mind, to the Labour Party capital gains tax idea. You're saying it's incremental, but are you also saying it's really significant that they're just trying to nudge it in?
I think it's a sign that Labour hasn't really changed much with its incrementalism. Remember, Chris Hipkins said he wouldn't introduce a capital gains tax if he was Prime Minister. Then he was made not Prime Minister and said he would look at it again. We had Jacinda Ardern, who is arguably the most gifted politician in our generation, try, and I think half-heartedly in the end, to put in a capital gains tax, and eventually said she wouldn't do it in her lifetime. I don't think Labour are truly committed to this. They are conflicted in all sorts of ways. And if we want real change, there has to be a different policy, because saying that 9 out of 10 people are not going to pay anything means that actually the core problem is home ownership of residential real estate is used as an investment tool. More than $1 trillion of the $1.6 trillion value of our housing market is owned by owner-occupiers. And unless you change that core incentive, not much really changes in our economy. And to be frank, in the long run, it is big, disruptive, revolutionary change which actually sticks. and actually makes a difference.
Well, it has to be
Incrementalism.
ambitious and exciting. Just go back 1 minute, because that was a really remarkable economic statistic that you just described, which I'm not sure that I fully understand, because I have a different view from you about this, less informed, of course, but no less well iterated. But you just said that. What did you say? Just say about 1.5 trillion.
So the housing market
is
worth 1.6 trillion overall. More than 1 trillion of that is owned by owner occupiers, so not rental property investors. And this capital gains tax obviously doesn't apply to the owner occupied property. And what we have is people who are households. They have surpluses, some of them, and they're saving money, and they are putting their money into their own home. So what they're doing is investing in decks. They're investing in new roofs. It might be solar panels. That might be good. It might actually help, make a warmer, drier, safer home. But it's not a new business.
But
it's
all
not
the incentives, Bernard. So where I disagree with you on this to some extent is that all of the incentives, and people do what seems sensible. All the incentives are to do that kind of thing.
Exactly. And they're not that way overseas. Overseas, there is an encouragement to put money into pension funds. There are subsidies for ISAs. In Australia, you get a tax benefit. In the States,
Well, there should be a total tax benefit for KiwiSaver. Of course, It should be like an ISA. All right. Poor old Simon, our lovely producer, who nobody wants to hear more of, except that he's a lovely chap. And Bernard, I disagree with you about certain aspects of this, which including the idea that the government is best placed to spend our money. But that idea that the incentives are totally distorted at the moment towards residential investment is just so clear. And the KiwiSaver is the one that is just sitting out there so obviously as a brilliant, brilliant idea. And yet there's virtually, am I right in thinking now, there is virtually no tax benefit in investing in a KiwiSaver anymore.
Yeah, it's barely $500 a year for those people who have money in KiwiSaver. It's been pared back over the years by various governments, and it is nowhere near as much of an incentive as it should be. And yes, it benefits those people who put the most into it, so that would be the rich. But remember, at the moment,
but they still can't take any. Even there's still the incentive for doing it is still so tiny.
Yeah, and the returns for residential investment and residential investment property leveraged up, adjusted for risk, are way, way higher than the returns you'd get from KiwiSaver or other types of investments.
Yeah.
And
all right, so let's do a special episode recently, because I was talking to Sam Stubbs the other day, just on email, partly because he'd got shat on because of his comments about Charlie Kirk, or not so much Charlie Kirk, but the issues of Charlie Kirk. And I thought that I was quite impressed to see a New Zealand businessman sticking his head up above the parapet. But he said there's really cool things coming on KiwiSaver, or potentially. So let's get Sam on. I think you're absolutely right, Bernard. This KiwiSaver it's got a psychological incentive, but absolutely no economic incentive other than the $520 a year you might get from the government. That's why
it's so remarkable. It's got to $85 billion.
Yeah.
And it's now substantial, and is now actually short of investment opportunities in New Zealand. And that's why the home fund we talked about there is one of the vehicles for KiwiSaver's funds in New Zealand to put money into affordable and social housing.
Well, let's develop that in a progressive, discussive, and an interesting way. Can I just also say that weirdly, and I'm not going to do a skateboarding dog today because I didn't find a good enough one, and I was practically ready to slip my wrists by the end of the day today about this, but I really agree with Winston Peters about Fonterra selling its retail brands. I just think it's nuts, and it's also a betrayal of 40 years of persuasion that we could go up the value chain.
Essentially, it's a national surrender of ambition.
It seems to be, and I just don't think we're becoming price takers. But anyway, Bernard, it's lovely to see you. You're going to do a Terreo play out, as it were.
Yes. Thank you very much, everyone. Ngā mihi nui, ka kite anō. See you all next week. Bye-bye.